Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for those of you that are in Europe, and welcome to our webinar, How to Bridge the Electrification Gap in Asia through Off-Grid PV Systems. This webinar is organized in preparation to the Unlocking Solar Capital Asia conference, which is planned to take place end of September in Singapore. I will tell a bit more about that a bit later. My name is Charu Chadha. I am a senior project manager in Solarplaza, responsible for the Asia region, and I will be chairing this webinar. So let's present briefly what you can expect for today's webinar. We will start with the introduction, as I already did, with a few practical notes and introduction to our speakers. Afterwards, we will start with the overview of off-grid solar segment in Asia and its most promising markets. We will continue discussing what are the recent innovative mobile technologies in the market. And for the last 15 minutes, we have a Q&A session planned, which means that yes, you can feel free to ask your questions, and in a minute I will tell how. So the webinar is planned to last for 1 hour. In case you have a question, and we encourage you to have your questions ready, use the chat box in the right-hand side of your screen. The same goes for the technical issues. If you have any problems or you cannot hear us well, please use the chat box and our colleagues will try to help you solve the problems. One note as well, the presentation slides as well as the webinar recording will be available afterwards. So we will send it to you by email. Okay, so I will start very briefly with a presentation about Solarplaza for those of you that don't know us. Solarplaza is a knowledge platform of over 50,000 PV professionals, and our goal is to accelerate the energy transition. Our main business is organizing high-level conferences and trade missions. However, you also seen quite a lot our reports and white papers, either country-specific or region-specific. So we try to provide valuable information to our network. As I said in the beginning of this webinar, we are planning in preparations to the Unlocking Solar Capital Asia conference in Singapore, 28 to 29 September. So here is a place to learn from experts in the region and meet the solar PV value chain across Asia, from developers to service providers. We are going to cover all countries from Southeast Asia to Central Asia. So yes, please save the dates in your calendar in case you are interested. Also, good to mention that the conference is equally divided into on-grid and off-grid tracks, which will make sure that we cover the segments and all segments get equal attention. And here you can see some topics that we plan to discuss at the conference. We will have case studies and pitches of the successful off-grid and mini-grid projects that happened already in Asia. We will very broadly discuss financing of off-grid and mini-grid projects and innovation, what innovative business models exist and how we can accelerate the process even further. One last note about the conference. Here you can see the selection of participating companies already confirmed. I'm also very happy to announce now that the World Bank Group will become a co-organizing partner. So we will be joining efforts with the World Bank Group to make this conference as impactful as possible. Along with the World Bank Group, we have the support of DG, FMO, IBC Solar, and TCX. They are partnering with us in this conference. And yes, we want to thank them all for helping and supporting us. So before we proceed and before I introduce our speakers, I want to tell you a little bit why we selected this topic for the webinar. According to the World Energy Outlook 2016, 512 million people do not have access to electricity in developing Asia. Out of this number, 244 million, so almost half, accounts for India. 102 million account for Southeast Asia, mostly Indonesia, Myanmar, and Cambodia. And 166 million account for the rest of the developing Asia, so thinking about Bangladesh, Pakistan, and others. As a comparison, the number of population without access to electricity in Latin American countries is 22 million, and in Africa, higher, comprising to 634 million. So looking at this shocking number, it sounds like a very big problem, but it can also be turned into an opportunity. This means that there can be a big untapped potential for off-grid companies and innovative solutions to step in and cover the gap in Asia. Therefore, with this note, I would like to present our first speaker, Laura Sundblad. She is a program advisor at GOGLA. GOGLA facilitating access to finance program. The objective of the program is to help increase investments in the sector that will allow to scale up and accelerate the development of the off-grid market. So Laura will tell also a little bit more about GOGLA, Global Off-Grid Lighting Association. Laura, I will make you a presenter now. So please have your presentation in the full screen mode.
All right, great. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, and we can hear you well.
Perfect, thank you. So good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to those of you who are in later time zones. As Shushan mentioned, I work at the Global Off-Grid Lighting Association as a program advisor on our Facilitating Access to Finance program. And I'm very happy to join this webinar with Solarplaza today, and I'm very much looking forward to the Unlocking Solar Capital Asia conference as well. I have a pretty daunting task today in terms of giving an overview of the whole off-grid solar market in Asia. It is obviously a pretty diverse range of markets and range of customer segments to cover. So what I'm going to do is to share a little bit about GOGLA and our members, and share a little bit more light into what's meant by off-grid PV and what are the different business models that have emerged to make off-grid PV accessible and affordable to people who lack access to full electricity. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the key markets that we see in Asia as places of opportunity and places for further growth and scale up. And I'll be happy to answer questions as well at the end to give any more detail on any of these topics, and also to be prepared to meet hopefully some of you in Singapore in a few months' time. So what is GOGLA? We are the Global Off-Grid Lighting Association, which is an industry association for the off-grid electrification industry. So we work not only with lighting providers, but also with companies making products and services for mobile charging, fans, cooling, TVs, all kinds of standalone off-grid PV products that I'll go into a little bit more detail in following slides. And we promote energy access solutions that benefit society and businesses in developing country markets. So our members are private sector actors primarily who promote products and services from a customer-centric point of view. We have now over 100 members, mostly manufacturers and distributors, who have to date attracted over $500 million in investments. Our members are primarily companies that are working in Africa, but we do have several global members and several members that are from the Asian region. India, I'll go into a little bit more detail later, but India is the biggest individual country market, so we have several members who are active there. And in addition, we have members in in Pakistan, in Hong Kong, obviously several members based in China. And so we do have quite a diversity of both larger and smaller industry members. And in addition to that, we have a very important group of associate members, many of which are also supporting the Unlocking Solar Capital Asia conference. So these associate members are either investors in the sector or national renewable energy associations or research institutes or others who have a stake in this sector. And we keep on growing. So GOGLA started out 5 years ago with just 7 members. So that gives you also an indication of how quickly the sector has grown. And why work with off-grid solar, and why are our members so passionate about off-grid solar lighting and electrification? There's a few different reasons. One is that it provides a service that is high quality, so customers know what they're buying. Our members all provide products and services that start from the customer's needs. It's affordable, it's accessible, and it's scalable. And all of these mean that it can be deployed very quickly. So compared to large-scale infrastructure projects that take years or decades, an off-grid solar lighting or electrification product can be deployed very soon, which is important when you consider how urgent the need for electricity is globally. And to go into a little bit more detail on what these products are. So our members work on a range of products, starting from the smallest one, which are solar lanterns. So solar lanterns are small standalone products, typically with quite limited wattage in the panel, and those provide basic light and mobile charging. And these are products that can provide an immediate improvement in quality of life because they help to replace kerosene as a source of lighting and candles, which are obviously dangerous and not particularly bright or user-friendly, as well as dry cell torches that can be quite costly because of the constant need for new batteries. Going from solar lanterns, then slightly larger are solar home systems, and this is a broad category that really includes products from still quite small, less than 10 watt peak mini solar home systems to then solar home system kits up to 100 watt peak, and then typically products that are solar home systems that are over 100 watt peak are sold as components, so panels, charge controller, and battery. And these have become increasingly popular also as efficient DC appliances have become more widespread because now you can power a lot more with a solar home system than what you could used to. Some of our members also provide community lighting, so this is for street lights and other community level services. And a new category for us are solar products for agriculture and productive use. So these are all kinds of products that improve the value chain and improve efficiency across the value chain. So for people who are working in the agricultural space, this can provide cold storage, cooling, water pumping, irrigation, chicken incubation. Really, there's a whole array of products and services available. Then I mentioned that products in the off-grid space are affordable and accessible. And one of the reasons is that there's a range of business models that have emerged to make these products more affordable. So of course the price of solar panels has come down drastically, and that has already made these products and services more accessible. But in addition, there's a range of business models that make it easier for a customer to afford a product. So in the off-grid space, really the starting point again is the consumer. What does the consumer want? What does the consumer need? And what can the consumer afford? And there is a range. So some customers prefer to buy a service with very little commitment and little ownership of the product. And others then prefer to have, on the other side of the spectrum, something that they own and that they have full control over. So if we go kind of across the spectrum, on the service side, there's prepaid products and rental products. So with a prepaid product, the customer can choose completely how many days of electricity or hours of electricity he or she wants to buy without a commitment with purchasing electricity when he or she needs it and can afford it. And rental models, similarly, a customer can choose to rent a solar lantern, for example, for a day or for a week or for a specific occasion. So, for example, renting 50 solar lanterns for a wedding in India. That kind of service where the customer has very little risk and maximum flexibility. Then in the middle, we have perpetual lease and lease to own. Lease to own is a little bit more widespread from this. So here in this picture and in the previous picture on the previous slide, these are pictures from Simpa Networks, which is one of the attendees at Unlocking Solar Capital Asia and one of our members in India. So in a lease to own model, a customer has a preset payment plan of 1 or 2 or 3 years. He or she pays monthly for those 12 or 18 or 24 months, and after that he or she owns the product. Then there's another model where the energy company is not the financing company, but rather you have a partnership with a financing partner. So that can be a local bank or a local microfinance institution or a local credit union, savings group, who then the financial institution has the financial contract with the customer, and the energy service provider provides the energy product. And then at the extreme right end here is the full ownership model. So these are traditional cash sales where a customer purchases a product and then it's fully owned. Our members do all provide warranties for their products though. So even here, there is an ongoing customer relationship. What are some of the items that make these affordability mechanisms flourish and scale? So there's a few things that help in the ecosystem. So in these affordability mechanisms where there's a longer customer relationship and it takes longer for a company to recoup its costs and make its margins, the time frame is often longer than in a pure cash sale environment. So that's where the clarity, consistency, and predictability of national policy makes it a lot easier for a company to enter into longer term contracts with its customers, because then it can have clear pricing that they don't have to change. For example, if there's a change in the tariff regime, that means that a company can be left with quite a high risk. So clarity, consistency, and predictability are key in making affordability mechanisms less risky, more affordable, and encourages companies to engage with them. Another thing in the ecosystem is the widespread use and acceptance of mobile money, which Charu will speak to more in the following presentation. This is a little bit more complex, also because it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. So what we've seen, for example, in some of our African markets is that pay-as-you-go companies, these energy service companies, can actually be the ones who are driving more widespread use of mobile money. So they are actually introducing customers to mobile money, and the energy service provider is the first time that a customer has used mobile money. So that can go both ways. And then in terms of what the company needs, it needs access to appropriate capital. So obviously that's a key theme at Unlocking Solar Capital Asia, and especially with local currency finance. So with PAYGO companies, the receivables are in local currency, but invoices are often in foreign currency. So there, if you can't have enough local currency financing to finance your customer contracts, then you are left with quite a high currency risk. There's also a need for a skilled workforce with appropriate incentives in place. So what we've seen is that our members so far have had a lot of these pioneer costs of training their own workforce. Obviously, to a degree, that'll always be the case, but it really does help if they're is if there's more support also from the public sector in terms of what kind of human resources and human capital is coming into the market. And then there's a need to a robust supply chain and strong partners. So mobile network operators, for example, which Charu will speak to, logistics partners, courier services, CRM providers. There's all kinds of enabling companies that surround the energy service providers that can help them scale quicker. Then to go and look at the Asian off-grid market in a little bit more detail. This picture is from Nizam Bijli, which is a GOGLA member in Pakistan, who is also attending Unlocking Solar Capital Asia. Nizam Bijli provides larger scale systems. So you saw on the previous slide a very small Fosera product, and now you see a larger Nizam Bijli product. There's a whole range, and in Asia in particular, there's need for everything from the smallest to the largest. Before we look at Asia in more detail, I wanted to share a little bit of a global snapshot of the market. So GOGLA and Lighting Global, which is the IFC program, we collect sales data each 6 months from our members and associates. And we publish that data and we give each company an individual market share report. In the last year, in 2016, we had just over 8 million products sold, and just under half of those were sold in the second half of the year. And of those, South Asia accounted for about 1.4 million products, and then the East Asia and Pacific region has less than 100,000 products reported sold to us. And that's partly because we don't have a full view of that market. There's still quite a few off-grid solar providers in East Asia and Pacific region who are not GOGLA members yet. So we do hope that at Unlocking Solar Capital Asia, we also are able to get a little bit more of an overview of what's happening in Southeast Asia. But what is happening then in South Asia? So this is home to over half of the world's off-grid population. And Shushan mentioned earlier that there's about 244 million people without electricity access in India. Our figures show that it's actually a little bit higher than that even. So people who have little or no access to grid-based electricity is about 80 million rural households in India. So that's over 400 million people. And most of those households live in just 5 states, largely in the north and northeast. And India has made really important strides in extending the grid, but the population has also grown. So there's still very much need for more grid extension, for more mini grids, but importantly also for more standalone solar PV that can be deployed much quicker and have impact in people's lives sooner. Pakistan is also an important market. So according to the World Bank Group, the Pakistan rural electrification rate is actually quite high, but then at the same time, Lighting Pakistan, which is part of the Lighting Global program, estimates that there's still about 144 million people in Pakistan without adequate access to electricity. Bangladesh has the lowest electrification rates in South Asia. Thankfully, they do also have an active government that are addressing this access question, but there's still a lot to do. And our members have been very active in both of these markets, which have had quite different approaches to enabling the growth of off-grid solar. So Bangladesh is a case that many have heard of because of the very successful IDCOL program, which has enabled the development of the world's largest solar home system market with over 4 million solar home systems sold so far. At the same time, in Bangladesh, there is a discussion now on what is the future of the IDCOL program, because there's competition from cheaper products, and there's also a competing government giveaway program, which is undermining consumer confidence in the IDCOL program. So the IDCOL program, to give a little bit more detail, I'm conscious of time, is a program where concessional finance from World Bank, the Japanese government, and from other international actors was channeled through this state-owned company called IDCOL, which was managed with a private sector approach. IDCOL then had implementing partners, which were mostly microfinance institutions, who then were the ones who were actually deploying the solar home systems into the market. So people were paying for the service that they received, but they were paying less than they would have done if it had been a purely private sector funded approach. In India, at the same time, there is also government action, and there's ambitious goals by the government for universal electricity access. At the same time, there's still a lot of space for growth there. So there's a need for innovation in business models and payment mechanisms, and Simpa Networks is a great example of a company that has innovated, has changed its approach according to the needs of its customers and according to what works in their specific markets in Uttar Pradesh and elsewhere. But at the same time, we need Simpa to grow, and we need a lot more companies also in the Indian market still. But we have very high hopes for what can happen in India, and we are, as GOGLA, also starting a program specifically focused on the Indian market. Then to look at Southeast Asia, which is a little bit less familiar to GOGLA. So here there are three main categories of countries. So there's countries that have almost full or completely full access to electricity. So Singapore being one, Brunei, Thailand, Malaysia. Then we have countries that have very large populations like Indonesia and Philippines and have high urban electrification rates, but then low rates in their remote island areas. And then we have countries like Cambodia and Myanmar where there is really low electrification rates across the board. So what we see then, to look at Indonesia in a little bit more detail, from our members, we have about 30,000 sales reported in the last 6 months, and that's a drop in the bucket when you think of the 1.3 million connections that are needed each year. So we do also hope to see more growth in the Indonesian off-grid solar PV market. There is also a need for mini-grids in some of the island areas, because mini-grids are quite well suited for islands that have dense populations that are remote. But at the same time, standalone solar home systems are often easier and quicker to deploy. So we hope to see both of those solutions being used in Indonesia. And you can see in this map how different the electrification rates are, generally going down as you move forward more to the east. Then in Myanmar, we had about 22,000 sales reported in the last 6 months. There's a lot of activity around a World Bank funded program where there should be about 1.3 million remote households targeted with solar home systems. However, in Myanmar, we are a little bit concerned that private sector initiatives may be dampened if there is a fully concessional provision of solar home systems being done in certain areas. So we are very strong advocates of government, DFIs, and private companies working together to see how do we build solutions that are sustainable and that'll be what the customers want and need and can afford. So to scale the Asian off-grid market, as I mentioned, there's a lot of potential, a lot of things already happening. But there's a few things that are common across these very diverse markets. So one is what I just mentioned about making sure that there's communication between the public and the private sector. One is to improve business climates. This is more of a concern in some countries than in others, to facilitate investment, particularly international investment, and to reduce the risk for companies and for investors, and also at the heart of that is reducing risk for customers. And then making sure that the solutions are adapted to what customers need. And in each market, you'll have a diverse range of customers. It's it's not going to be one size fits all, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we're learning from markets and that we're not always starting from scratch and building models for every single specific market, but rather we'd like to see that we're looking at what's happened elsewhere, what's worked elsewhere, what hasn't worked elsewhere, and then adapt those solutions into the diverse markets across Asia. So I will stop there. Happy to take questions later, but now I want to give time for Charu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. I think GOGLA is doing very important work to solve part of the problem. And before we move forward and before we start with the next presentation, we have one quick question about a program that you mentioned, Laura, that GOGLA is starting in the Indian market. Can you already share in few words a little bit more about the program?
I can share a little bit. It's still in very early stages. So in India, we will be working with the Clean Network, which is the Indian Association for Renewable Energy Products and Services. So we'll be working with Clean to see how we can best support the market there. My colleague Johanna Dieker is currently in India and starting up that work. So we hope that in Singapore and then in future events, we can share a little bit more detail on what the India program will look like.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. And for those that are still interested or would like to hear more details, of course, feel free to connect with GOGLA. You can see the contact details. And yes, I will move forward to presenting our next speaker. So our next speaker is Charu Chadha. She's member of GSMA Mobile for Development Utilities Program. She leads the Innovation Fund in Asia and manages the fund grantees as well as engagement with the ecosystem, including telecom operators, donors, and startups. I also believe that Charu and the team are doing a great work, and she will tell a little bit more about the fund and the upcoming deadlines, as well as the innovative technologies connected with mobile operators. So, Charu, please put your presentation in a full screen mode so I can share your screen right now.
Great. Thank you, Jean. All right, so I think first of all, I'd like to take an opportunity to thank Solarplaza for this opportunity to share our learnings and to talk a little bit about what GSMA and the M50 Utilities team is doing.
It is our pleasure.
Thank you. So just to give you a bit of a background, for those of you who may not know, GSMA is the global body for all the telecom operators. And we have a team called Mobile for Development that looks at how mobile technology can be used for social impact. The utilities team specifically looks at how mobile technology can be used to increase or improve access to energy, water, and sanitation. We work in both Asia and Africa. I'm based out of the Delhi office and lead our work in Asia. The fund so we do a couple of activities under this program. One of them is the Innovation Fund that Shushan just mentioned. In addition to this, we also do our own knowledge sharing and convening, so events around looking at how mobile technology can help startups or kind of connecting operators and startups. We also have an advisory function, which is purely focused at operators, so kind of helping telecom operators start up utility services. The fund or our work is supported by the UK government. And today, the way I thought we would maybe go about this is kind of take you through some of the interesting technologies and business models that we are seeing being supported by mobile tech. This is in no ways an exhaustive list, but I think just some of almost cherry picking from a number of different things that is happening in this space. But before we start, I think I wanted to give a quick call out to the Innovation Fund. So like I mentioned, we give out small grants between 150,000 to 300,000 pounds to startups, NGOs, telecom operators. The idea is to both either pilot or scale an innovation that is using mobile technology. I would strongly encourage you to have a look at our website. The applications are presently open. We'll be accepting applications till the 3rd of September. On the screen, you can see our 34 grants that we've given till date, and they're really spread out across Asia and Africa. But we're every time I think we're looking for something new. So what you see here might be something that we funded in the next round, but we're open to seeing new things and looking at what else is out there in the market. All right. So I'll start a little bit with how is mobile technology helping the entire off-grid space. And really, when we think of mobile technology, we think of it as much broader than the phone or the SIM that's in your hand. We really look at the idea of how all is the mobile network being able to facilitate the kind of transaction or the kind of support that the off-grid electricity space would need. So maybe just to run you through the different types in which mobile technology can be used. The first one is machine-to-machine connectivity. And this is really the idea of saying, is there a way to remotely switch on and off a piece of equipment, or to remotely track the performance of an equipment? So Laura briefly spoke about the pay-as-you-go model, and the pay-as-you-go model uses really this ability to remotely control solar home systems and to be able to switch them on and off. This can be done through M2M. It can also be done without it, but really this is at the core of that model. Mobile services, this is what is mostly understood to be mobile, right? So USSD, SMS, apps, a way of communicating through the mobile phone. Mobile payments, so this is the entire digital financial services space. Everything from M-Pesa to do transactions to now increasingly in Asia we see much more complex regulations around mobile money, where really mobile money is a new form of banks that are being set up. And the last one is something that's very new, which is really looking at is there a way to use the data that gets produced when you use your mobile phone in ways that might be useful, right? So can we use it for credit scoring? Can it be used to establish identity? So really looking at this idea of, we have these people who we don't have any information on. Is there a way to look at the data that they're producing using their mobile phone, monetize or connect it in a way that is useful to them? Okay. So I'll go through a couple of different examples or a few case studies that we've seen, and they essentially go in from what we're seeing practically to some really theoretical concepts that we hope to see in the future. Smart metered grids, as I think we've all kind of spoken about mini grids, and we all understand what are its challenges and how it's working. So there is really nothing, in some ways, nothing new about a mini grid. But what's really interesting for us from a GSMA or from a mobile technology perspective is how putting in meters can really help increase consumption, right? So you're kind of looking at a flat fee mini grid versus metered mini grids, where you have the ability to charge differently to consumers based on the amount of consumption that is happening. And when you start adding the concept of smart to it, or being able to monitor that kind of just starts increasing the operational efficiency of the mini grid. The idea really is to see, how all of that technology helps improve operations. So the picture we have over here is from a mini grid done by Gam Power in Nepal, and really the idea was to see how you go up more than the 30-40% utilization rate that you typically see to a much higher rate. Over here they're seeing utilization rates in high 80s, right? And the idea has really been around how do you use the data that the meters are producing, that the network monitoring systems are producing, to create the right kind of tariff plans or create the right kind of flow systems that are helpful in increasing that utilization rate. So really looking at how technology is kind of being able to create to take an existing business model, but like add another layer which is making it more efficient. And similarly, when you add the idea of mobile payments to it, it again adds efficiency to the system, because you're not blocking cash in the system. There are no leakages. So in all ways, technology is kind of taking an existing system but kind of giving it a little bit of a twist. Credit scoring. So I spoke about this a little bit when I was explaining the different channels, but this really looks at two things. One is if I am able to create a credit score for somebody I have no data for, does it create new access, right? So, your standard ways of looking at credit scoring on does this person stay in the same place, or does he have a certain kind of income, may not be sufficient or may not clear them. But by creating a new kind of credit score, am I getting new kind of information and increasing access? Will more people be able to access credit, and through that credit access energy products if I'm being able to create this credit rating for it? At the same time, it also looks at this idea of can it connect people who already might have access but need more access, right? So you need a bigger system because you want to run a productive load, but you're not able to make that right connect with the bank because you have a banking history. But does your telecom credit score help you create that connect, and really helping people move up the energy ladder, so increase consumption? So I think that from our perspective, this is going to be very interesting, both in terms of increasing access and getting new people on board, as well as increasing consumption and getting people who are already connected be able to consume more. And we're seeing some very early trends in this. I think Telenor Pakistan, in our latest report, we'd mentioned it is kind of looking at how this data can be used and how they can monetize it. They're working with Eco Energy Finance to kind of develop this credit score and see if how effective this is. I think the idea, or really the testing point for this particular model, is just how effective the credit score will be and what are really the right criteria and being able to measure somebody's ability to repay. Personally, I really like this idea of peer-to-peer energy trading. So I think the example we have on screen is from a company called Solarplaza, but various versions of this particular format are being run. So Solarplaza essentially hopes or has a vision of connecting the 4 million solar home systems that are there in Bangladesh, but in a way that people are able to trade energy, right? So I might have a bigger system but my neighbor does not have a solar home system. Is there a way to connect these houses that are right next to each other for me to sell energy to someone? And this again has a very interesting implication, right? It has both increasing access, so somebody who cannot afford a system is able to buy, to another completely different aspect of income generation, right? So setting up energy to be sold. I think what's really interesting about this model also is just what are the different layers of technology that would come into play. So it's not just about using machine-to-machine connectivity to be able to measure these systems. It's about mobile money to be able to pay it. There's a Chinese startup, Energo Labs, that's really looking at how you use blockchain to manage these transactions. So this really takes this idea of what is rooftop solar, which is very common in the developed markets, and it kind of brings it down to the developing markets and saying, how is this relevant in dealing with both really dense urban settlements as well as really off-grid smaller settlements? So this, again, there'll be a lot of regulation, a lot of different things that, when it actually comes into play. But I think the interesting thing about this model is that it really has the potential to grow and is kind of can be created or can be applicable to many different contexts. This is the last one, and this is really where we start getting into the more theoretical space of things. So most large technology businesses today are considered platforms, right? So your Facebooks and your Amazons, they're all essentially platforms. And the beauty of a platform is that it horizontally connects across many different things and really creates that network effect that is required for scale. But when we talk about platforms in the off-grid space, we really, so mobile money, for example, is a really good platform. It's become like the backbone for economy in a country like Kenya. But what would a platform look like in the energy space? And recently at an event in Africa, Daniel for CGAP was explaining how there's this really initial pilot that micro energy credits and Equity Bank are doing, where they've basically created an e-commerce platform for a mobile-based e-commerce platform for solar products and bundling it with an instant loan. Right? That in one go removes so many of those hurdles that we've been talking about in the off-grid space, about distribution, about access, about marketing, about finance, and but kind of brings it together in a way that some of these or a lot of these challenges are just tackled together. So I think the approach of the business model of a platform would increasingly start becoming more relevant to the off-grid space as well. And I guess the last bit that is what do we feel is needed to accelerate the off-grid space in Asia? I think a lot of it is about partnerships. I think the one thing that really separates Asia from Africa is just how competitive these markets are, and how much more or how many more players that exist in whether it's India or whether it's Bangladesh, and how many and that opportunity to kind of come together and build things. I think there's also a really massive opportunity to work with corporates, to work with telecom operators, or to work with existing FMCG companies, and to kind of see how some of the really innovative products or relevant products that the off-grid companies are building can be kind of put onto the infrastructure of these corporates. I think that opportunity is really, really evident in the Asian markets. That's all for me. Would love to take any questions. If you have any questions on the fund, please do email us or have a look at our website, which has all the details. Would love to hear your thoughts on technology and how you're using it, and what do you think are some of the very Asia-specific challenges in technology.
Thank you very much, Charu, for the very interesting presentation. We have a few questions, so for both of you. So I would like to ask Laura also to unmute herself, so she can also hear and answer the questions. So first question, I think it's more referring to the slides that Laura showed in her end of the presentation. One of the attendees is curious, Laura, how did you count the families? How do you consider families as electrified? Is there a minimum, let's say, minimum number that you can use, or if you say a few solar lights sold, how do you consider a family as electrified?
Thanks, Trishan. So that's an excellent question, and it's one that is discussed a lot in the sort of off-grid solar and in the broader electrification community. So there's a few different things that are going on in my presentation. So one is what GOGLA itself measures, which is purely the sales of products. So we measure how many products are sold, and then we, in our impact metrics, translate those sales into how many people have access according to the multi-tier tracking framework. The multi-tier tracking framework I didn't go into in my presentation, but the multi-tier tracking framework is a framework developed by World Bank and other development partners that measures energy access on a more nuanced way than just have access or not have access. So you have tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and tier 5. Tier 5 being sort of full developed country access, sort of in typical terms. And then tier 1 and tier 2 are typically the tiers where you get to on with either multiple lanterns or with solar home systems. But in my presentation, when I'm talking about people who are electrified or not, I'm going off of data that typically, again, the World Bank collects together with national governments. So there it depends a little bit on the national government's view of what is electrified. So for example, in India, electrification numbers come from whether a village has a connection or has 10% of households connected. So it varies from country to country, and you can we could have actually a whole other webinar looking at just the measurement issue. And one of the things that in the off-grid solar space we're trying to discuss also with governments and development partners is what type of access counts as access, and what kind of products are needed to get to that access. So trying to also measure, are people accessing the first tier of electricity access, or the second tier, or the third tier, or are we only looking at, you know, what are the grid extension projects achieving, and how many people have access to grid electricity? So it's a range of data sources, and it's a range of estimates.
Okay, no, thank you for the explanation. We have a few more questions, and for both of you. Yes, very curious also, since Africa already has done few big steps in the off-grid market, and the market has developed already in comparison to Asia. Looking back, as both of you worked in both continents, what do you think? What are the key lessons that Asian off-grid market can learn from Africa? Are there 2 or 3 points that you would like to highlight? So maybe we start with Laura and we continue with Charu, since.
Okay. So again, both of those markets are very diverse. But what Charu mentioned in her presentation as well is this need for partnerships and doing things together in innovative ways. I think that's something that we're seeing very much happening across the different African solar markets. And that's also where, you know, some companies that started out as being fully vertically integrated are now increasingly looking at different kinds of partnerships to help them grow quicker and expand into new markets as well. So I think that there's sort of space to look around and think about how do we do things differently, and how do we leverage on the comparative advantage of other actors in the ecosystem.
Thank you, Laura. Charu, do you agree, or you have any additions to this? What is your opinion?
So I think I definitely agree to this idea of, you know, the industry coming together. I think personally, Asia and Africa are not comparable markets in my mind, and simply because, you know, a lot of the activity that we see in the African market is based on some really strong local enabling factors, which are very different for Asia, right? So Asia is very cost competitive, something we didn't see in Africa. Mobile money was a huge enabler, whereas, you know, in Asia, the definition of mobile money is completely different. So I think the one thing we would maybe we can learn from Africa is that it responded to the local environment and local challenges in a very focused way. And maybe we need a similar approach for Asia, where we kind of look at what are the challenges of this country or this continent, and what are its enabling factors.
Yeah, definitely interesting. Yes, if you look, Charu, for how the market is developing right now in Asia, the off-grid market, what do you see? How do you think the market would look like in 5 years from now?
So I think the one thing we're already seeing, and we'll see much more of, is the size of systems. I think Laura was showing Nizam Bijli's system, which are much bigger. I think it's really interesting when you talk out in the you know, to MFIs and other people who are financing in the space. They're very interested in this opportunity of, you know, really large systems that are not just lighting, but are really looking at, you know, can I run a computer on this? Can I run a small photocopying machine on this? So I think there's a lot of this interest in the tiered approach that was being mentioned earlier, and how you move people up the energy ladder. I think the other thing that which is an interesting thing, and I think also quite focused in Asia, is this incremental growth. So people take one system and then they want to add one appliance, rather than, you know, buying this closed solar home system that we see a lot in the African market. So I think that's, again, something very we're seeing a lot of it in Asia, where people buy one appliance, then they'll buy another one, then they'll buy a light, and they're kind of building these larger systems.
And it was very interesting, actually, your last slide, where you showed a few examples of innovations. One that drew especially my attention was the energy trading that you mentioned. What do you think? When would that be possible? That particular innovation? Do you see it in a few years' time?
So very early forms of it exist, but the example I was showing was from ME SolShare, where they're actually they're trying to do it. And then very sophisticated forms of it exist, in terms of a lot of the Indian cities, for example, have something called net metering, where you can sell to the grid, but not individually. unfortunately, I see this as one of the areas where regulation would play a really strong role. And we would, for it to be really seen as a commercial deployment, we'll need to see a few more changes to regulation, because this really sits between, you know, the regulation of telecom, the regulation of energy, commerce. So there are a lot of different players, but we will, I think in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll see a lot of these pilots happening, especially, you know, in the mini grids or the smaller grids, where people are trying to see what's the value of it. There's a very well developed kind of energy trading that I think is happening in the US. So it's a company in New York or someone that's actually doing this, but we should be, I think in the next 2 or 3 years, I hope to see some data on peer-to-peer trading.
Yes, exactly. It is in the early form, so hope to see some development on that soon. What do you think, Laura? What is your opinion about the market in the 5 years' time? What do you see will change?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I wish I knew, but also I hope that things come up that are sort of beyond my imagination. But obviously a bigger market with more alternatives and more customers being able to access the products and services of the off-grid solar PV segment. But I also do think that in Asia, we see this already, that there's quite a few, and also in some African markets, we see the governments now realizing that off-grid solar can be a really highly impactful technology for their citizens. And so I do hope to see ways in which the private sector and governments collaborate to make sure that off-grid technology is deployed in a way that still puts the customer at the heart. So accelerated deployment, but retaining the high levels of customer care and customer service to make sure that we're really putting technology out there that people want to use and maintain. I think that we'll see quite a lot more in the productive use segment, so not just larger solar home systems for homes, but also for small and medium-sized businesses and for agricultural use. I think that there will be some more technological innovation as well, and that will help also in reducing climate change related emissions, so having more products that help replace diesel, for example, and diesel gensets. So that'll be one sort of area. But at the same time, I do think that there will be a continued need for products that are flexible, as Charu was saying, that customers can choose that they can build up larger systems, they can have lanterns, solar home systems, they can have maybe something that's grid connected, maybe something that's not. So basically more diversity in terms of the products, in terms of the business models, and in terms of the partnerships that are taking place. And through that diversity, then larger scale.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very good note also to end the discussion. So I would like to thank Laura and Charu for your time and for the very interesting presentations. You will be also able to meet Laura. Unfortunately, Charu won't be in Singapore, but Laura and other off-grid solar players in Singapore, and we will join forces to discuss how the industry should move forward. Just a last note. Yes, upcoming events. Our upcoming events, we organize Unlocking Solar Capital events not only in Asia but also in Africa. So you can also see the dates. It's in October, and we organize a larger conference, Making Solar Bankable, in Amsterdam, jointly with FMO, the Dutch Development Bank, which will be in February. So yes, if you are interested, please save the dates in your agenda, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of you in Singapore. Thank you very much, and have a good day, all of you. Thank you for joining the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.